Okay. Hello, everyone. Oh, you're good. There was like someone trying to have a discussion in here, and they booked it for this time, but they didn't actually book it. So there's probably going to be people periodically coming in confused about whether or not there's a discussion in here. So we can ignore them. But yeah, we're going to be covering generative AI today, which is very exciting. Something we've never covered before. It's the first time ever. So it might be a little rough around the edges, but hopefully it'll be interesting. Hopefully it'll be exciting. I'm really excited to present it. So hopefully that translates. My name's Zainor, by the way. So yeah, one note though is that we're not going to be going too in depth on like how this stuff actually works, right? That's more of like ACM AI's um, field, right? So we're just going to be talking about how to apply it as a web developer, as a software engineer, and why you might want to do that. Okay. Okay, cool. So membership portal code, if you've been following along, is $1 trillion question. You'll see why very soon. Are they giving prizes for like if you get in the top?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yes.
potentially worth doing.
Yes.
So yeah, but I guess if you haven't been doing it, you're probably not going to catch up at this point. So there's no real reason. But yeah, so okay, different this week is that we have workshop notes. So you can scan this QR code. It'll take you to a GitHub README. It basically is just a notes version of what I'm going to be talking about today. So if you're like me and you learn better from like reading rather than just like listening, then that is there for you. Also, the slides are right here, and that's going to be on every slide, I think. So yeah, very cool. Okay, so we have prizes. We have prizes. I didn't know what we're gonna have going into this, so I just wrote insert image. But yeah, I thought we were gonna have plushes. Unfortunately, we don't. I think that's probably gonna be reserved for not next week, but the week after next, because next week is Thanksgiving, right? So yeah, if you ask a question, answer a question, then you can get one of our lovely tech decks, stickers, other stuff that's in there. Cool. All right. And before we start, just a preface, I'm going to be moving kind of fast. There's just a lot to cover in this workshop and not that much time, only an hour. I might go a little over. I'll try not to. That being said, if you ever need me to slow down or anything like that, ask a question or raise your hand. I will be more than happy to re-explain something. So keep that in mind. Okay. Second point is generative AI is controversial, right? So if you haven't heard, there is a lot of debate, especially recently. I think in September, actually, there was a lawsuit filed by a bunch of mainstream authors. One of them was George R. R. Martin, if you've heard of him. He wrote Game of Thrones. And basically, he claims that OpenAI, which is the company behind ChatGPT, stole his content without his consent and included it in their training set for their model, right? So it's a bit of a moral gray area, I think, but I don't think it's productive to just sit around and wait while these things are resolved by the legal system, because the legal system is notoriously slow, right? It'll probably be like 3-4 years minimum before we see any results out of that. So while we're waiting, we might as well, take advantage of what we have while we can, right? So yeah, a little controversial, but we're gonna learn it to try to take advantage. Okay. And third point, which is the $1 trillion question on everyone's minds right now. Are we all screwed, right? Is ChatGPT, is generative AI going to take all our jobs as software engineers, as web developers, etc.? Luckily, the consensus is probably not, and that is for one really important flaw, because of one really important flaw, which is that it's incapable of creativity, right? So what do I mean by that? Essentially, if there's a program that's never been written and it's not included in the training set of, these models, ChatGPT, etc., ChatGPT will not be able to produce it, right? It's just incapable of doing so. And on the other end of the spectrum, if a program has been written many times before, you know, some really common function that's performed in a software application, but every time it's been written, it's included some major security flaw, right? ChatGPT is going to include that security flaw when it generates code. So you can see why that would be a big problem, why if we just switched over to using ChatGPT completely, we would have a lot of issues, right? So luckily, human ingenuity is needed, creativity is needed, and we're safe for now, fingers crossed. So yeah, we can breathe a sigh of relief collectively. Yeah, cool. So that out of the way, what is the plan today? Well, I'm going to be going over a quick intro to GitHub Copilot, which if you don't know is basically it's like ChatGPT built in your VS Code. It lets you like generate code, ask about code, fix bugs, stuff like that. Really cool. I think probably most of you, if you haven't heard of it, you definitely want to get on that. So I'm going to be showing that off today. And the second thing is I'm going to be integrating an AI assistant into a React app, right? So we can get a little peek of that in a little bit, which is right now. So any Notion users, you like Notion? You like Notion? I'll be honest with you, I really don't like Notion. I I can never wrap my head around, like it feels so like it bogs me down.
Very much like TikTok productivity.
Really?
Like it is really aesthetically pleasing to
Uh-huh.
use, but a lot of the functionality is just very overly complicated.
Mm.
Like you have to access so many features that should just be really apparent.
But you use it anyway.
I use it because I just want my data to look nice. And if
Okay.
you do it on PowerPoint, like if you do it on Excel, Excel is so much easier. But
I see.
Excel also can look really messy sometimes if you don't organize it. So Notion just kind of organizes it for you, or like it specifically just like it allows you to do some other things as well, but it is also has a lot of drawbacks.
Okay, well, I'm not going to use it, but do you want something? I feel like that warrants
I'll take a sticker later.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, so we're going to be making something in the spirit of Notion, but significantly worse. I'm calling it not Ion. I don't really know how to pronounce it. I didn't really think it through. But yeah, this is what it looks like on the right here. It's basically just a notes app, very simple notes app. So we have all the notes on the left here. And on the right here, we have this sidebar where, oh, you can't really see it that well. Sorry about that. But basically the user can input some, some note, a title, some content. And then here, you definitely can't see that. Let me just do it in the actual app. So I can do a command, right? I'm calling it @GPT. Let me zoom in. Like that. There we go. Can you see that? Is that okay? Yeah, @GPT. If I just say hello, man, this thing's blocking me. Then I can do this. It'll think for a little bit, and then it will respond with the response from ChatGPT. Right. So that's really cool. I can also do another command, which is @image. Can't really see it too well, unfortunately. But basically, it'll take all the text in the note, and it'll produce an image based on that. So that's what's going on here. So it looks at the content of the note and produces the image. Okay, so that's what we're going to be building a little bit later. But first, I want to talk about Copilot a little bit. So you might be wondering to yourself, like, why should I care about this? Like, I've been coding for so long. I haven't been using Copilot. I don't think I need it. But let me try to convince you otherwise. It's going to make your life significantly easier, much easier. And this is supported by a lot of data. GitHub Copilot, or GitHub themselves, conducted a survey of, I think, a pretty sizable portion of developers. And unanimously, they all agreed Copilot made their life significantly easier, right? So it's going to provide a couple of different functions. One of them, and we'll show this off later on, one of them is explaining code. So you can ask it to explain some pre-written code. It's going to be very helpful if you're using, you're writing in some foreign code base that you've never been exposed to before. You don't have to like dig around manually and try to figure out what's going on. You can just have it explained to you, right? And also fix bugs. If you can't find a bug, you can ask it, try to fix it. It's surprisingly very helpful. Like it tends to fix it most of the time, which is crazy. And also you can automate away writing tests. No one likes writing tests, but you have to, and Copilot can make that easier. And it's the industry standard, or so GitHub claims. I feel like that might not be quite true yet. I think there is quite a few holdouts, especially like bigger tech companies. I know Apple, for instance, straight up banned it. Like you just can't use it in their code base. But I feel like we'll start to see in the next 5 to 10 years, probably more and more companies are going to start allowing it. Maybe they'll, make their own language model and incorporate it and tell people to use it within the company. But regardless, it's probably going to be helpful to start learning how to use them now. So that's what we're going to do here. Okay, so this thing on the right, this is from that survey that I was talking about. Basically, you can't really see that number, but it's 88%. 88% agreed that they were more productive when they used Copilot. They were less frustrated, 59%. More focused on satisfying work, 74%. So that's not trivial. That is quite the majority. So yeah, you're gonna want to use it probably. Another thing, this is not the biggest sample size, only 95 developers, but they had half of them use Copilot to write a web server in JavaScript, which is what we talked about last week. And they had half of them not use Copilot. And you can see that the ones that did use Copilot on average took less than half of the time to finish the server, right? So that is not trivial. That is a big difference. And I feel like more and more we'll start to see people are going to be left behind if they're not using these language models to write code. Okay. And I think one important note to make is that these are very error prone right now. You will see an example of that later on, but you're going to want to check over the code that it generates. Otherwise, you might run into a lot of problems. Okay. Cool. So to set up, I'm not going to walk through this, but you can look at the instructions here. Some important notes is that it is free with a student account. If you have, I assume all of you are students. So yeah, it's going to be free for you. Otherwise, it's going to be $10 per month if you're not a student. And then you just install a VS Code extension, and that will build this little pane over here into your VS Code, and you can ask it anything you want, right? So if you don't know, you can install VS Code extensions through this little sidebar here, and you just look up Copilot. Yeah, and then you can install it through there. Again, I'm not going to walk you through that, but you can check out the instructions right there. And I just thought their business model was kind of funny. So they're like hooking you on while you're a student, while you're developing, making you dependent on it, right? And then they're gonna start charging you $10 per month later on. So yeah, that's what that is. Okay, before we get to the actual interesting part, or I guess this is interesting too, but before we get to the meat of the workshop, we have to do a little review just to refresh your memories, right? So last week we talked about servers, HTTP, asynchronous code, all of that, but we're gonna do a little review. And it starts with, what is a server, right? So does anyone have like any ideas they wanna share?
A server is basically a really large computer stored somewhere else that can process the data that users like enter through a website.
Yeah.
By using an app. And
yeah.
then like the server like gives the user back some type of data that like processes what they inputted originally.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a good way of looking at it. Would you like something, or maybe later?
Okay. Later then.
Okay. Or now. Up to you.
Okay. Sure.
Okay. I'm gonna give you a skateboard because you look like you would want a skateboard. There you go. Cool. So I think that's a good way of looking at it. Just to make it a little more concrete though, I think personally for me, the best way to think of them is as a black box, right? So what is a black box? It's something that takes input, performs some processing behind the scenes. You don't necessarily know what that processing is, right? and then it gives you some output, right? And the key thing here is that you don't know what is happening behind the scenes, right? So, you give it stuff, it does some computation, it spits stuff back at you. Yeah, so this is called abstraction. You've probably been exposed to this in your intro CS classes. It is pretty fundamental to all computer science. So I'd be surprised if you hadn't learned about it yet. But yeah, so you can think of something like Google, right? Google has a bunch of servers. You submit input to their servers, which is like your search query. And then it gives you some output after processing that query. And that output is like a bunch of search results, right? And I like to show this little game off whenever I talk about servers. It is you're basically, I don't know, I just really like it because it's very calming and very you'll see. Basically you're like a wolf in a forest. You have a boba shop and then like a bunch of animals approach you. And you make boba for them. And it's great. Some of that. Okay. Enough of that. But yeah, check that out if you want. It's pretty fun. Okay. So here's just a visual representation. Last week we talked about the client-server model, right? So we have the server on the right here, the client on the left. The client is just something that wants some data from the server, right? So it's going to send a request to the server. The server is going to hear that request. It's going to perform some computation behind the scenes, and then it's going to send a response object back to the client, right? Cool. So you can think of it like a restaurant, right? So we have the customer here. He's like the client. He's ordering some food from the server. And then we have the server here in the back. They are going to prepare that food for the server, or for the client, sorry. And then we have this lady, the waitress. She's also part of the server, but a more special part, which we will get into. And then how do we communicate, right? So the customer and the waitress, in our restaurant analogy, can speak English, right? They have a common language, right? But how do the client and the server talk to each other? Does anyone have any ideas? We talked about this last week. Yeah. Right. But like, what is in those requests? Like, right? Like, how do we define what a request is? Right. You're right. You're definitely right, but not exactly what I'm looking for. Do you want anything? Sure. I have a lot. Oh no. This one? I mean, it's kind of messed up. Okay. Yep. Cool. So yeah, the client server need a common language, and this is something that we call a protocol, right? So a protocol is just a structured way to define how we send a request to a server and how we get a response back, right? So in particular, the protocol that we're going to use is HTTP, which stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And since we talked about this last week, I'm going to blaze over it, but some key components of it that you need to remember for today's workshop in particular is the method, right? So that's some stuff that you were mentioning, like the get, post, put, delete. Get is going to be a request for some data. Post is going to upload some data, etc. Endpoint and host, that's going to indicate where it will be done. And you'll see that this is very important for us in a little bit. So here's an example of an endpoint, get/profile, that gets a profile from the server, right? Okay, so what are we missing? There's one key thing that we haven't talked about yet that is really important for us to have. Otherwise, there's no way for the client and the server to talk. And as an analogy, again, going back to the restaurant, we have a common language, right? Like we have HTTP, the client and server can talk to each other, but how does the customer know what they can order, right? Like how do they know if the kitchen can make something for them, right? Anyone? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you stole my punchline, but but yeah, we have a menu, right? In the restaurant example. So the the customer knows that they can order baked escargot for $16 because of the menu. And the analogous thing, like you mentioned, is an API, right? So an API stands for Application Programming Interface. This is new, right? We didn't talk about this last week. Yeah, I don't think so. So Application Programming Interface, just a way for two computers to interact. In this case, it's the client and the server. And then ours are going to be a little more special. They're called web APIs. What makes them web APIs is that they communicate using HTTP messages. All right. So these APIs are going to consist of, like you said, several endpoints that indicate what the server can do. Right. So in this case, the customer knows that they can order a baby wok from the kitchen or a deep fried baby. And that's analogous to like endpoints on the server, right? What? I just looked up a quirky menu and this is what popped up. Yeah. Okay. I know I went kind of fast, so any questions, don't be afraid to ask. Cool. Okay, so this is, we're gonna do a quick example of an API. I just whipped something together a little bit ago. We want basically a cat facts API. So if we call this API, it's gonna give us a random cat fact back. This is my my foster cat from last year. I miss her a lot. I don't have her anymore, unfortunately, but she was great. Her name was Zelda. But yeah, let's do a quick example. So last week we talked about express apps, right? So an express app is how you define a server and consequentially how you define an API, right? So here's my little API here. This is the catfax API, like I said. We have a root get request. We have a get/fact, which sends a random cat fact in plain text. This corresponds to, if you're interested, it corresponds to this function down here. And then we have a get/facts, which sends all facts on the server. This is this facts array. And that corresponds to this function down here. All right. So I'm going to run this server, and then it's going to let us make requests to it. Oh, sorry, it's index.js. So I'm not going to get too into detail about what's going on the Express side, but just trust me that it does work. And you'll see, if I pull this up in my browser, the browser by default is going to make GET requests, right? So we have our root endpoint here. If I add /fact, it will give us some random cat fact. So cats have 5 toes on their front paws, but only 4 toes on their back paws. And if I refresh this, you can see that it is actually random. It gives us a bunch of different facts every time we refresh. Can't really see that, but yeah. So yeah, that's the API. That's all an API is. It's just a way for a client to interact with the server and to let them know what they can order, what they can request from the server, right? Cool. Going back to a bit of review, asynchronous code. We did talk about this last week as well, but quick review. So asynchronous programming is just a way to, it's just a technique to execute code out of order, right? It's going to be very important for us as we make a bunch of network requests using our APIs, because we don't necessarily know how long a task is going to take to complete, right? So we don't want it to block all other tasks from proceeding, especially since when you think about it, there's no guarantee that a server is going to send a response back, right? So how do we avoid that problem? We use asynchronous programming. Okay, if you're like me and you're interested in the implementation of this, I was always very confused because I heard that that node was single-threaded, right? But like, how can you do things at the same time on a single thread, right? That's a little more advanced. So if you want to read into that, I have this linked here, but I'm not going to get into it too much. I do think it is interesting though. Okay, and promises. So we talked about promises last week as well. here's just a little visualization. So a promise is a container that represents a future value that is yet to arrive on the client, right? So it's just something that will probably come in the future, but hasn't yet, right? So going back to this, we have our client. It sends a request to some server out there. And then we're going to tie that request, the eventual fulfillment of that request, to some variable, some box. And until that request has been sent back, until that response has been sent back to the client, it's just going to be pending, right? So we can't yet access the value within it. Then we have the server here. It gets the request. It's going to perform that computation behind the scenes, and then it sends a response back to the client. And once it receives it, it's going to store that in the promise in that box that we were talking about earlier. And then we can eventually reach into that box and pull the value out. The way we do that is we have this .then function. That's one way. We call that on the promise, and we have async await, which is another way that I personally think is nicer. So I'm going to use it in the rest of this workshop. But all it does is it just pulls out the value from that promise, right? Cool. Again, that was kind of fast. Are there any questions? So.
Can I understand like promise as a sequence of status?
So what part? Sorry.
Yeah, is it like a sequence of status or the whole process of pending and
So it's not the whole sequence. It's just that promise is referring to the eventual fulfillment of a request that a client makes, right? So a client is going to make a request to a server. It's going to store. It's going to make a reference to the future response, but it might not necessarily have that response yet. And then once the response is sent back to the client, it's going to be stored in that promise where we can unwrap it. Does that make sense? It is a bit of a confusing topic. I definitely, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, so what happened if the server never did?
If it never gives anything back, we're going to get an error called a timeout. Basically, there's like some set amount of time. I don't know what it is, but if we don't get that response back, it's just going to error out. Yeah. Okay, any other questions? This is kind of confusing, so. Cool. So going back here, we have .then, we have await. Those are both ways to unwrap the promise and get the value within. Okay. And how do we actually make these network requests in our code, right? We use something called the fetch function. Fetch is pretty simple. It is one of the simpler APIs that it's one of the simpler functions that we use. So all we're going to do is pass in a URL. This URL is going to be the address of the server that we want to get data from. And it's going to return a promise like we mentioned before. Okay. So with this all in mind, I'm going to do a quick demo. But before I do that, I want to walk you through the code of the Notes app, just so you know what's going on a little bit. So I'm going to go over here. Here's my app.jsx for this app. And actually, on second thought, I don't really want to go through the effort of explaining everything. So I'm just gonna ask Copilot here to explain it and see what they come up with. So again, this is gonna be very useful if you're working in a foreign code base as we are right now. We don't have to trace through everything and figure out what's going on. We can just ask it to explain, right? So it's being a little laggy here. I don't know why. Okay. Hello? Okay, here we go. So it's kind of wordy. There's a lot of text here, but to boil it down, the most important part is the submit function, right? So this submit is going to be called whenever we press this button here, and it's going to submit a new note to our notes on the left here. So just as a demo of that, I'll just say hello, and then boom. So very cool. can also delete notes if we want. So all we have to do, I have to zoom out a little bit. All we have to do is just press this button here and it calls this function, which deletes the note. And then I have this, which we don't need to worry about too much, but essentially all it's doing is just loading the notes from local storage so that it is persistent across user sessions, right? That makes sense, right? Okay. Then we have this part right here. It's just going to iterate over this notes array, which stores all the notes, and then it's going to map over them and produce a note component. This is something we talked about, I think, a couple of weeks ago. And then we have this note submitter, which corresponds to this on the right, which just lets us submit stuff, right? Cool. So yeah, now that I've done that, we can do the demo, right? So I want to add a new command to my demo here, my notes app. And the way I want it to work is that if the string @cat is found within the title or content of a new note, I want to add a random cat fact from the cat facts API to the note, right? So just as an outline of how we might approach this, I think the place that makes the most sense to add this is within the submit function, because here is when we can check if @cat is in the note, right? We should also add a check before any of the other code in this function to see if that substring is present. And then we'll use fetch, which we talked about earlier, to submit an HTTP request to the server. We probably want to use get/fact here, which again is this endpoint right here. It's going to send a random cat fact in plain text to the client. Okay. And then since fetch returns a promise, we're going to unwrap it using async await. And then after that, we can append our new fact to the node. So I didn't really practice this demo too much, so I'm not that confident in my ability to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all this in here, and I'm going to navigate to my app.jsx, and then I'm going to pull up. I'm just going to ask Copilot to generate some code for me. The way you do that is you do Command-I on Mac. I don't know what it is on Windows. I'm sorry. Probably like Control-I or something. But yeah, you would need to test it out yourself. So yeah, I'm going to just copy paste all this stuff in there, and then let's see what it comes up with. So it's going to take a little second here. Okay, so pretty fast, generated a bunch of stuff. So you can see it made the function asynchronous, which is great because we want to use async await. We can see that it's checking if cat is present in this variable here. All it's doing is it's checking if the title includes @cat or if content includes @cat. The title again refers to the title, content refers to the content. Okay. And then down here, oh man, I've never seen this before. This is great. So it's doing a bunch of try catch stuff. I guess we'll roll with it. I already do see some problems though. For instance, it's doing .json. I'm not going to go over what JSON is, but basically this is the wrong function for our purposes. We want to use text, right? And this is also wrong because we're not going to have an object. And also, yeah, there's one other problem. It isn't setting our content equal to the result of adding the cat fact to the new content. So we're going to have to fix that as well. So I'm going to accept this. And let's see. Okay, so also there's one other issue. It's checking. It didn't listen to me when I said to, it's a lot of problems. It didn't listen to me when I said to add this check before any of the other code. So let's just move this stuff that it generated up here. Yeah, I also need to move this part down here. Boom, let's format, there we go. Yeah, so I'm gonna change this, like I said, to .text. I'm gonna get rid of this. And then I'm going to change this to data. This also is wrong. I'm gonna make a new variable that says, new content equals, boom. There we go. And then I'm going to say new content. Yeah, so we can see that it had a bunch of issues, so it's not going to replace us anytime soon. Actually, when I was rehearsing this, it was much closer to what I wanted. I don't know why it messed up this time. I was just nervous, I guess. So I'm going to add this to that. And this is going to make it so that it updates. Hopefully this works when I run it. I also want to say return in here so that it doesn't go on and add that note to all the notes. Okay, so let's try this out. I just need to stop my other version and run it in here. The way we do that is npm run dev. Then if I do @cat, let's see what it does. So there we go. You can see it added a cat fact. And if I do this a couple more times, it'll just keep, oh, it just completely regenerates. No, I'm gonna set this equal to content. There we go. All right, very cool. So it just adds a cat fact from our API to the note every time we do it, every time we submit. All right, so that's very cool. That's essentially, it did everything for us, except some details. But yeah, we have this fetch function that we talked about. It awaits the result, it unwraps it into this response, and then it gets the text from that response, and then it adds it. Okay, very cool. Any questions on any of that? Nice. Okay, so now we're gonna get to probably the harder part of this workshop, which is implementing the AI assistant, right? So we're gonna be using OpenAI's API for this. Our CatFacts API was a bit of a warm up. You'll see that OpenAI is a bit more involved, but yeah. So let's get to it. Unfortunately, OpenAI's API is not free. Ooh, there we go. OpenAI's API is not free. I just loaded in like $10 in a couple of weeks ago, and it's used about $5. So it's not terribly pricey, but it's not nothing. So yeah, if you don't want to to pay, then don't do this. Oh, also you need to make an OpenAI account if you want to do this. So I would do that as well. Pricing is not too crazy. We just have it's like, this is the newest model. It's going to be like about 1 cent per 1,000 tokens. This is the one we're going to use. And then you'll see that the image generation is a little bit more expensive, unfortunately, but yeah, that's just the nature of how it is. Okay. And since we're paying, we have one other little key detail here, which is we have an API key, right? You may have seen this before if you've messed around with APIs. But essentially what this is like a password to your account, right? So it's really important that you don't store this anywhere in plain text. Otherwise, people can steal your money that you load into the account. So be very careful when you're using this. Don't do what I do later today, which is just write it down and include it as like a constant. Don't do that. You're going to want to use something called environment variables. I'm not going to get into it too much right now, but I would look into it if you're going to make like a production app in the future. Right, so I'm gonna make a new secret here. I'm just gonna call it Hackschool. There we go. And you're gonna wanna copy it. Otherwise, you'll never be able to see it again, as it says right here. So just make sure you copy that down. I'm gonna add it in here as a constant. So const API key equals what? Oh, the fact that I'm, yeah. This is a little big, let me move it. But yeah, don't do this. This is a huge security issue, and people will steal all your money if you do this. So do as I say, not as I do. Okay, we're also, for some reason, I don't know why OpenAI did this. They wrapped up their request stuff in a library. So you have to install a library to use it. So all the fetch stuff that we talked about is not going to apply, unfortunately, but it is going to apply for the majority of other APIs that you use. So yeah, I'm just going to install their, let me just cancel that. I'm I'm going to install their library by doing that. And we're going to wait a little bit. And then now I can import OpenAI, OpenAI from OpenAI. There we go. Okay. And now what I want to do is I want to instantiate a new object, which is the OpenAI object, right? So all I'm going to do, just say OpenAI. I'm going to use state since it is a stateful variable. New OpenAI. And you can see it suggests that I pass in an object with an API key. So I'm just going to do that. I'll say API key and then API key. There we go. And I'm also going to do one other thing, which is dangerously allow browser. I'm going to set that to true. It sounds a little scary, but basically all that this is doing is it's letting me call the API from the browser, right? This is also a security risk. So again, do as I say, not as I do. You're not going to want to do this. Maybe instead you probably want to make like some Express app where you do all this. But for the sake of demonstration today, I'm just going to do it here just to keep it simple. Okay. So yeah, we have our OpenAI object, and now we can make a request to the API, right? So a lot of the time when you're making API calls, you're not going to know. It's going to be really hard to understand what you can do, right? Unless you look at the documentation, right? So you have to look at the documentation if you want to use these APIs. In my case, I'm just going to literally copy this over and put it. Well, actually, first, man, I wish it did not generate this ugly code. It's so bad. But yeah, I'm gonna just copy this over because I can use some similar logic. And I'm gonna change this to be at GPT. I need to copy this over as well. Boom. Yeah, I'm just gonna do this. Okay. So I'm going to check if GPT is present. Oh, damn it. I'm going to check if GPT is present in the title or the content of the note. If it is, then I'm going to make an API call. Right, so I'm just going to copy this over, like I said, and put this right there. Okay. And what is that sound? Anyways, so yeah, we can see we're calling on our OpenAI object that we instantiated earlier, we're calling .chat, .completions, .create. Again, you're not expected to remember this. It's just how it is. I don't know why they make it so convoluted, but yeah, that's just how it is. I'm going to format this a little nicer just so it's easier to look at. You can see we have this messages key and this model. I'm going to change this to be the one that we looked at earlier, which is let it autocomplete. GPT-4 11OK preview. This is basically their newest one, the best one, one of the cheaper ones too, so I would use it. And then we have this down here. Ignore this for a little bit. I'll explain it in a second, but I'm going to add a new message to the messages array. I'm going to make the role of that message. Let me just add a comma here. I'm going to make the role of that message the user. So the user is just basically the one that asks questions in here. And then I can give it some content. So I'll just say prompt, right? So again, this is just what the user asks the API or the assistant, right? So if this is defined again. Get rid of that. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to define the prompt, which I'm just going to make it let prompt. I'm going to set it equal to the title and the content of the note. So I'll just say title plus that plus content. There we go. And then I'm going to pass that in to the user role message, right? You might be wondering, how do I actually access the response? Once again, it is extremely convoluted for no reason. Let me just find it here. This is what the response object looks like. Don't ask, I don't know. But the content that we want is right here, right? So it's within the choices key, and then the message key, and then the content, right? So this choices is going to be an array. So we're going to want to access the first item of that array, and then the content key of the message. Okay. So hopefully I can remember all that without going over again. So I'll just say const response equals, I already forgot. It's going to be completion dot choices dot message. Oh, 0, because it's an array, right? Dot message dot content. Yeah. There we go. And I'm going to add this. If anyone's wondering what this is, it's just a way to add variables within a string in JavaScript. It's not too important, but I'm just going to get rid of it because it's a bit confusing. Okay, check a type. There we go. All right, so we are now appending the response onto our content, and then we're setting that content. We're going to basically just add it on the right here. Yeah. All right. Am I missing anything? No. Let's try it out. Oh, whoops. Thank you. Yeah, so if I run this, let's see if it works. All right, so I just do @GPT hello. It's going to take a little bit to load, and then you can see it said, hello, how can I assist you today? There's like a little weird pause there, so I'm going to add just a little indication that it's loading, just to make it a little nicer. The way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to say set content to content plus new line, thinking. Ugh. Thinking. Okay, let's try this one more time. Hello. Now it's thinking, and then it says hello. Very cool. All right, now we're going to do something similar for the image @image command, right? So if I go over here, oh, I forgot to show you this slide. Whoops. So @GPT, what we just implemented, is going to prompt our AI assistant to respond like we saw. But there's one key thing that we haven't implemented yet, which is we want it to be able to look at our previous notes, right, and reply to stuff that's in those notes, right? So how might we do that? Basically, it's using something called the system prompt, right? And the system prompt is just a fancy way to say we want to define the role of the assistant somehow, right? And I wrote this system prompt ahead of time because I didn't want to have you sit here while I think of system prompt. But all I said is answer questions based on the user's notes. You should always identify the notes where you got the information by title, et cetera, and then I'm going to add all the notes at the end of that system prompt, right? It's worth mentioning, I think, that this is a terrible way of doing this, yet again. I'm so sorry. In reality, you'd want to use something called embeddings, but I felt like that was too complicated for our purposes here, so this is what we're doing. The reason it's not ideal is because we're charged based on the length of our request, right? So if we have a lot of notes, if the user has a lot of notes, it's going to be very expensive, very fast. So that's why we want to avoid this in a real app, but just for the sake of demonstration, that's what I'm going to do. So up here, we saw this system message, right? This is where we want to define it. But I want to define it as a stateful variable, and you'll see why in just a second. So I'm going to say system prompt, and then set system prompt equals use state. And I'll just make it empty initially. Okay. So the reason I made it a stateful variable is because imagine the user adds a new note, right? How do we reflect the content of that new note into the system prompt, right? We need to update it somehow. How do we do that? Luckily, React has built in a very helpful function called useEffect, which you saw a sneak peek of earlier. UseEffect, all it does is if something in this dependency array is modified or changed in some way, it's going to call this action, which is some function that we pass in, right? So again, the action is going to be called whenever a dependency is modified. In our case, we're going to want to pass in our notes array as our dependency, because again, if like a new note is added, then we want that to be reflected in our system prompt. Okay. Yeah, so I'm just gonna write that real quick down here. So if I say use effect, boom, and then I'm gonna pass in a dependency array, and in that array I'm gonna put notes because I want this function right here to be called whenever the notes changes, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna define some prompt, right? I'll just set it equal to what I had in the slides here. If I go over here, there we go. And then I want to add the content of all the notes, right? So all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna iterate over the notes array, const note of notes. And then for each note, I'm going to add, I think they were here for the discussion probably. Yeah, so I'm gonna add the content and the title of each note to this prompt iteratively. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say prompt plus equals, and then note dot title. So if you're wondering, I defined the notes up here. This is what a note looks like. It's just an object which has a title, some content, and an image, which we will get to later. So I'm going to add that title, and then a space, and then note dot content as well. And I think I'm going to add a separator here too, just so that it's not all bunched up. I don't know if that actually matters, but I'll do it anyway. Yeah, so now that we've done that, I can go in here and say set system prompt, which is the function that I made earlier, to prompt. Okay, and now we should be able to access all of our notes. So if I go into here, it is running. If I go into here and I ask it, for example, just scroll through here. So I have a note about an SF trip, and you can see on Saturday, I do a bunch of stuff. Let's ask it what I did on Saturday. What did I do in SF on Saturday? Okay, hopefully this works. Oh, it's not gonna work, and I'll tell you why. Because I forgot to do one thing, which is set the system prompt in here to system prompt. Yeah, it says I don't have access to your personal activities, sorry. So I'm gonna copy this and refresh at GPT. Ooh. Now let's try again. Okay, according to your notes titled SF Trip 23, where is it? Right here. On Saturday, you visited Foster City Mall, Palo Alto, and Mission Peak. You were scheduled to leave in the evening. So that's cool, right? And we didn't have to do that much code, right? It looks kind of scary, unfortunately, because of the try catch stuff. Yeah, I literally just ripped all this code from their documentation. Like I didn't really do much. And that's kind of exciting, I think. You can make something pretty cool without that much effort. Okay, but I have this last thing that I want to implement, which is the @image command. And this is going to basically prompt our AI assistant to generate an image based on the current node, right? So that's what I was showing you earlier. I can just copy this all over. If I do this, there we go, let me format so it looks nicer. I'm gonna change all this stuff. I don't need this anymore. Change this to reflect that I want to check for @image, right? There we go. And then if I go, ooh, get out of my way. If I go over here, we can see some more documentation, right? So again, not expected to know how to do this. Documentation is your friend. I'm going to copy paste all this into here. If I just do this, get rid of that part. Oh wait, that's the wrong one. Whoops, I want this. Wait, where is it? Hello? Image. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Okay. Here's the part that we want. Okay, so I'm gonna copy. Whoops. I'm gonna copy this over, and then I'm gonna format it a little nicer. Just get that over here, get this on its own line, get that on its own line, and then format. Actually, that looks kind of ugly. Sorry. There we go. That looks better. So we specify our model, which is DALL-E 3. That's their image generation model. And then we have some prompt. We can just pass in our prompt from earlier right there. And then to access this image, bro. Okay, it's not letting me scroll on this part. Whatever. You can see it's kind of cut off, but it's right down there. Basically, we have this data array, and within this data array, we have objects that have URLs in them. These URLs are going to point to the images that are generated, right? So we just want to access, we want to get to this URL, right? Hello, are you here for hack? Oh, I think that's an A68. Yeah, no problem. Yeah. What was I doing? Oh yeah, here we go. Okay, so the way we access this is we do data 0.URL. So I'm gonna type that in. Oh, sure, yeah. Thank you. So if I get rid of that, data 0.URL. Oh, but it needs to be of image.data 0.URL. Semicolon. Okay, so that should be good. Let me just double check. So .data 0.URL. Nice. So now this response is going to contain the URL. And then all I want to do, so I made this ahead of time because I didn't want to go through the hassle of adding an image to this, just a bunch of CSS and HTML and stuff. So I don't want you to worry about that. So I just went ahead and did it ahead of time. If I just add a response right there, it's going to set the image. And I think that should be good. Let's find out. Any suggestions? Any ideas? What should I generate? Quack. How do I spell that? But like, what's it doing? Quokka in a party hat on its birthday with all of its friends. Good times. Okay. Thinking. It's going to take a little bit. This one takes a little longer, unfortunately, but yeah. It's going to generate something down here in a little bit, hopefully, if everything went well. All right. There we go. Very cool. So all of its friends, is that a quokka? What is that? Dude, these are kind of terrifying. But let's ignore that part. But this is cool, right? So we generated this image based on what she said. So there we go. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. That's the demo. Hopefully you were not coding along. If you were, I'm sorry, because I was going kind of fast. But yeah, I encourage you to go through and do that later. I have it all the steps are in the notes. You can watch the recording and follow along. So yeah, any questions though on anything? I know it's tough to follow. All right, cool. I'm gonna assume that you guys are all on the same page. So a couple closing remarks. That's it. That's the last Hackschool major content. I think not next week, but in 2 weeks, we're going to be having a workshop on deployment. It's going to be very short, and that's going to be James back there. He's going to be presenting that. Hopefully you're feeling inspired. I think it's really cool. Like, you don't really need to put in that much effort to make something cool, which is great. Here are some next steps, some ideas for how you might develop this in the future. So I'm just going to pull this up. This is my notes thing. So one idea is that, so I didn't tell you this earlier, but while I was working on this workshop, OpenAI decided to release a new API for what we just did, called the Assistance API. I took a look at it. It seems more involved, if you can believe it, than what we did before, but ultimately, I think it's probably better significantly. For instance, you don't have to do this like janky thing where you load in all the notes like through the system prompt. So that's good. I recommend checking that out if you want. Also, another thing you could do to improve your UX, I don't know if you guys noticed, but our response just like immediately popped up once everything was ready. But in ChatGPT, the way it works is like it'll pop up word by word. So you can implement like a streaming thing. That could be cool for a better user experience. And also make your own app. There's no shortage to what you can do, right? So if you need some inspiration, OpenAI provides a bunch of examples of what's possible on this page right here. That's platform.openai.com/examples. You can do a lot of cool stuff with not that much effort. So pretty cool. Also, please give us feedback. If you scan this QR code, it'll take you to a Google form. You can add some feedback there. Hopefully constructive. You can tell me that it was terrible and I will cry, but it'll be fine. Yeah, if you give us a feedback and you come up here and you give us some proof that you filled it out, we'll give you a prize. I wish we had better prizes. Unfortunately, we don't. But yeah, thank you for coming, and hope everyone has a good Thanksgiving next week.